But now we come to a period that I call the battle for identity.
Lies my grandma told me. Yeah, superstitious devices. Lies my grandma told me. What? Urban mythological rules. Bubble mice, yeah.
So you were born in Israel.
Right, I was born in Israel 52 years ago.
Yes.
And in 1978 I came here.
Mm-hmm.
Before I came, as every Israeli citizen, and this is true for men and women, I was drafted to the Israeli army after high school and served for 3 years in an infantry unit. And over a year I spent in the occupied West Bank as a soldier, and I saw a lot of things that make me very upset as far as the treatment of the Palestinians.
Give me some examples of that, of what you saw.
Well, you know, the Israeli soldiers are part of their routine on those days is patrolling the cities. And the native Palestinians were subject to a lot of physical abuse and verbal abuse by soldiers. From small things like soldier entering stores, small grocery stores, and stealing cigarettes and drinks. And if the store owner complains, I'm telling just something small, you know, starting from small. They were just frightened, and you saw the children sitting in a corner of the store and also frightening. And I wrote sometime complaints, and those complaints was completely unnoticed, you know. Only if some foreign correspondents, which on those days very rare, came to see what's happening there. If there was some major things, then maybe some soldier had been punished. But overall was like, so this was like, soldier can go, if a Palestinian teenager gave you a dirty look to a soldier, they can come and beat them. And sometime until they lose their conscience. You know, I was witness one time how land have been confiscated at 5 a.m. in the morning when our unit came to declare an area as a military zone, so nobody can go in, and a fence had been built around some area. This was the way, the practice of taking a land, and then a notice have been put on the doors of the farmers, Palestinian farmers, that this land is not belong to them under some emergency rules that really were the British rules. You know, the Israeli government using what they call emergency regulations. And what those emergency regulations was put by the British authorities when they have been occupied all entire area, Israel and Palestine. It was put in 1945. And under this rule, a military governor of an area can decide the territories can be confiscated for security reasons. People can put in jail for 6 months if they consider to be a security threat. You
mean the person who owns the land, after they decide to confiscate it, he goes like to pick fruit off his own trees.
But he could not because the fence.
He can be put in jail for 6 months.
No. What I'm saying, he can put, but what those people who have been put in jail is basically were activists. Activists. If you know to be on those days, and if you, the military governor decides that you, and on those days, a political activist. Today, they said member of terrorist organizations, and some of them maybe are. But on those days, most of the activity of the Palestinians were political activities.
So non-violent.
Non-violent activities, and many of them put in jail as a security threat.
So that's like people demonstrating in the United States, going to a peace march, they could be put in jail for 6 months.
Possible. Let's say the organizers.
Right.
The organizer put even before the demonstrations to avoid the demonstrations.
I see.
You know. But you see, this is occupations. The Israeli law do not apply to the Palestinians. It's very hard to do it to an Israeli citizen, to put him in jail for 6 months. You really have to give very strong argument. And one of the reasons is because there is no constitution in Israel, so you can do it. But the Israeli law do not apply. Many things that the Israeli army doing in occupied territories, they cannot do inside Israel.
I see.
Even against Israeli Arabs. You know, so anyway, I was witness to this, and I can say, you know, I was 19 years old, 20. I could not, I was not brave enough. You know, I was arguing with other soldiers, but I was not brave enough to say no. So, but I saw it, you know. I saw how demonstrations have been broken. First, the shooting in the airs, and they were beating students. You know, I didn't see any direct killing of Palestinians, but the daily abuse sometimes was worse because it's humiliations every day of people. And I think the first seed, or what I believe, of the suicide bombing was built on those days.
So at that time, the Israelis were kind of manhandling the Palestinians, but the Palestinians, by and large, at that time, were not violent toward the Israelis.
No, not at all. Maybe only outside Israel. What I mean is the PLO was functioning mostly outside Israel, and sometimes they engaged in some terrorist act, like in München, Germany, during the Olympic. They killed but inside the occupied territories, there was hardly no violence on the Palestinian side.
So you didn't see any stone throwing or anything?
No, I saw stone. You know, stone throwing, it can't even consider once in a while a stone throwing on a military vehicle, on a soldier, but it was not an organized uprising like the way it started in 1988, the first Palestinian uprising. Before was, you know, sometime when Israeli soldiers went to school, high school, and beat the students, so here and there, some students throw stones back on the soldiers. But you can't call it really you know, it can happen even, it's happened inside.
I'm glad you're explaining this, because people don't understand it. They, you know, it's put like, oh, they're stone throwing.
Well,
like
let me tell you something.
They're throwing nuclear bombs or something.
My father lived under the British. This way, you know. He came to then Palestine in 1924 as a teenager. So he lived under British occupation from 1924 to 1948.
Where was he from originally?
He's originally from Ukraine. And he told me many times how Israeli high schools, Jewish high schools, students, threw stones of British soldiers. So this is not a like the Palestinian teenagers did not invent the idea of throwing stones. This is happening in every occupation. It's nothing unique. I mean, I know that the George Washington engaged in the military guerrilla warfare against the British occupation here. So what I'm trying to, overall, when I was in the army, it was hardly no violence on the Palestinian side. We were the one who instigated the violence, initiated the violence against civilians everywhere.
And at that time, why were the Israelis confiscating Palestinian land?
Well, this was officially lined. The official line on those days was for security reasons, to build military posts. But eventually, a lot of those lands have been turned to be the settlements. These how settlements have been built. Settlements did not have been landed from the moon. They were not existed before the occupations. This is all lands that have been confiscated.
And what's the justification from it? Is it true that the justification for just taking the land away from the Palestinians and putting Jewish settlers there, is that because it's considered, or the excuse is that, well, these lands were mentioned in the Bible, therefore Jews have an innate right to them because God gave it to them, or something like that?
Well, you know, there can be, ironically, I think many people don't know, all the Israeli governments until today controlled by secular people, not by religious. The official reason all the time was security reasons. In order to keep security for Israel, those settlements have to be built. However, more to the right in Israel, including Sharon, who was one of the founders of the settlers movement, he believed, but not from religious reason. He said that this is part of the historic Israel, and therefore Jews have a right to settle every part of the land of Israel. That's what they said, ignoring the fact they are native people. You know,
native people who've been living there for how many years?
For hundreds of years, living there, you know. So, you know, you can find all the excuses. The question that I all the time ask people, okay, you build settlements, you consecrate land, now what's the future? There maybe was an assumption among the Israeli government, which they believe, that the Palestinians one day just take their belongings, get frustrated and leave. But it did not happen. So now you have 200,000, over 200,000 settlers in the West Bank. 3 million Palestinians living in West Bank and Gaza. Most of them are very angry and resentful in a level that we never saw before. And I'm not only talking about those who engage in suicide bombing, I'm talking about general populations who are living under curfew, no future, very angry population. Now
so let's describe the daily life of Palestinians. Here is the land that's controlled by the Israeli government, all the land. Some of it is Gaza and the West Bank, some of it is Israel proper. Okay. All that land, there are approximately 5 million Israelis and 4 million Palestinians, including Arab Israeli citizens. Is that correct? About
a little bit more, but more or less the numbers. Yeah.
Okay, so that's the
give and take
ratio.
Yeah.
Okay, and most of the Palestinians live in a lot less land,
right,
than Israeli citizens.
Right.
Now, the occupation restricts the movement of the Palestinians at this point, doesn't it?
Right.
How does it affect their daily lives?
I'll be honest with you, I did not go to occupied territory for a long time. So everything is just what I'm reading.
I see.
The only thing that I can have is an eyewitness when I was as a soldier in occupied territory, so I can tell you these stories. But I can imagine on those days the life was hard, but much easier than today, because it was not a curfew, and many of the Palestinians could go to work inside Israel. And now the main thing is that many Palestinians cannot go to work. Most of their jobs were inside Israel. So you have now over 50% unemployment. Now if you have a family that it's the people who are supposed to work in a family unemployed for a long time, you can imagine how the economic hardship. What I read in the statistics that over majority of the Palestinians living now below the poverty line. I even heard from the World Bank statistics that the Palestinian economy really in a totally disaster. They cannot support. You know that most people need economic support from outside institutions. You know, and this is how they deal with everyday life. Now, I want to tell you also that the Israeli economy also is deteriorating.
Yes.
So whatever I can say about the Israeli economy, you can multiply by 10 as far as the wars on the Palestinian side. You know, as far as the hardship and no see, no future, you know. And the point is that basically we came to a moment of truth. That the occupation of the Palestinians doesn't have no future. Not only for the Palestinians, also for the Israeli people. There is no point. The Israeli government or the Israeli people don't benefit from this. So-called security, there is no security.
Well, is anyone, why is the Sharon government in particular, why are they so intransigent? Why won't they? I mean, all they have to do is slice the territory up into two parts, have the Palestinians in one part, the Israelis in another. Why don't they just do that?
It makes sense what you're saying, but you know, there are some part of the human race that willing to go for hardship, but I don't know, sometimes, if I'll say, Sharon government are so stuck in their own nationalistic narrow mind. They're willing to drive to disaster both Palestinians and Israelis. You know, because you're absolutely right, it doesn't make no sense. You know, Sharon promised in the election twice, I'll bring you peace and security. There is no peace and there is no security. The occupation of Palestine doesn't bring no security to Israeli people. Absolutely no security. If you take, Israel made peace with Egypt. I was in the Suez Canal during the war of attrition, the war between Israel and Egypt. Every day Israeli soldiers died, every day. When Israel signed an agreement with Egypt and returned all occupied Sinai, there is no more peaceful border in the Middle East between Israel and Egypt. Same thing with Lebanon. Israel occupied South Lebanon for 18 years. Now the Lebanese-Israeli border is a peaceful border. Most of Israelis now going to north of Israel to vacations. They don't go to the occupied West Bank.
No.
They don't even think to go there.
Right.
They go to the north part of Israel, right on Lebanese border. There's a lot of resort towns. They go there. You know, so occupations of other people never bring security to any nations.
No, because you can't you can't hold a lid on 3 million people.
No, it's just not logical.
It's not logical.
So now I'm going back to here to U.S. And I think it's very important because Sharon as a prime minister or as a representative of the Israeli government does listen only to one single institution in the world is the U.S. government, for good reason. And the good reason is that the U.S. government gives the Israeli government $3 billion a year.
And that's a lot.
It's a lot of money, right.
I mean, if you divide $3 billion by 5 million Israelis, you just do the math.
It's the highest foreign aid to any country in the world. No other country. This number 2 is Egypt, with 70 million people getting $2 billion a year from U.S. government. You know, so U.S. government have the power, if they want to, if they really want to push Sharon to go to a meaningful negotiations and to accept the concept that the occupations of the West Bank and Gaza have to come to an end.
Well, you know,
and it's written even in the documents.
I'm going to tell you something kind of scary.
Yeah.
Because you may not know this. I went to a website by a Christian fundamentalist who's probably the fringe of American Christian fundamentalism. But here's the scenario of a certain sect of Christian fundamentalism. Fundamentalists. They feel that in order for the final Armageddon to occur, all Jews have to, or most Jews have to go back to Israel, and they have to be converted to Christianity. And wait a second. And Israel has to go back to, the Jews have to go back to their homeland. So this sect of Christian fundamentalists is completely opposed to any peace treaty because they feel like God gave Jews the right to that entire territory. And in this website, it was kind of humorous. They were saying that, to me, it was humorous. I don't mean to upset anybody who has religious beliefs, but that are sympathetic to this. But they said that they felt that the Northridge earthquake was God's punishment to the U.S. for doing some peace negotiations in Madrid. That we were being punished for trying to get a two-state solution going. So there's a tremendous amount of support of the Israeli government keeping all of the territories as part of Israel on the part of a rather large number of people who subscribe to these Christian fundamentalist movement in the United States.
I heard about this, you know, and most of these people voting for the Republican Party. And some people suggest that Bush, as a president, will not move any pressure on Israeli government because of these people. And I don't buy it because let's assume he does put pressure, whatever reason, whatever outside forces inside the U.S. and outside, that he does put pressure. Those people are not going to vote for Democratic Party because he put pressure on Israeli government.
That's true.
They're not going to do it, you know. And if their leaders promoting this ideology, I believe that many of the rank and file wake up in the morning and pay the taxes not based on the on the Armageddon, but based on reality in the United States. You know, when Egypt and Israel signed the peace agreement, majority of Americans, including fundamentalist Christians, were happy about this. So this
Now,
is not, so I know they're promoting it, and I even debated one guy in Pasadena College, in, what's the name, Caltech. And because in Israel, I learned the Bible, it's a mandatory. And I think there is, to make a point, this is not true, even from the Bible point of view, that God promised the land only to the Jews. I know exactly the statement. And I told the guy, and he admit, he was a member of one of those churches, and he admits that he doesn't remember even the statement. And the statement said that God promised Abraham that he will give this land from this river to this river, from the big river to the other big river. You have to figure out in the Middle East what big rivers, but it's what he really meant for the big river in Iraq to big river in Egypt.
Oh,
Anyway, so he gave this land to you and to your semen that will come from you. Now Abraham have 2 children, Isaac and Ishmael.
Oh, I see.
Now, according to the Bible, Isaac is the father of the Jews and Ishmael is the father of the Arabs.
Oh.
So he really promised this land to Jews
To
and
both
Arabs.
of them.
And I asked this guy, do you remember this statement? And he said, no. And I said, are you aware that Abraham have 2 children? And he promised land to, and this is the only thing he said, I give you this land to you and your semen. In Hebrew, to lecha v'zarcha kamocha. And I learned the Bible. I learned in a 2nd class, in 5th class. I did a high school diploma. It's mandatory to go on the Bible, on the Old Testament. So if I like, even I'm not a religious man, I know a lot of stuff from the Bible. And ironically, this guy, he didn't know even anything. He admitted he couldn't even remember. So this is also a lie that so-called that the God promised only the land to the Jews. And on those days there were no Jews, there were the Hebrew tribes. During this time, Abraham, historically, it's called Hebrews for all the tribes who live in the Middle East who spoke the language of Hebrew. And on those days, Hebrew is spoken by many small nations. And you couldn't figure out who later became a Jew and who's not, because the Jewish religion have been given 1,000 years later in Sinai, in Sinai desert. But those who speak Hebrew, it's one of the ancient language of the Middle East that did not apply only to later the Jews. You know, as a matter of fact, the Hebrew tribes on those days spoke Aramaic more than Hebrew. And you can find people in Syria and Iraq and Iran who speak Aramaic today, who are not Jews. It's their native language. It's the native language of the Middle East before the Arab Empire came. Aramaic was the main language, which is very similar to Hebrew. So even this I can challenge and say that this is big question of the Armageddon people, who promised to who what.
Right.
You know.
Well, you know, and I think that the American people have to wake up and realize that our own personal security could be hinging on how much we work toward peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians.
Let me say something about this. You're absolutely right, because one of the resentment and the anger in the Arab world and also in the Muslim world toward the U.S., one of the major reasons is because of double standards that the U.S. government apply to the whole question of human rights and freedom. They judge the U.S. how they treat the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. They said, you're talking about oppression, here is an oppression in the occupied area. You're talking about freedom, well, the Palestinians asked for freedom for 35 years. So how come you're saying you're willing to go to war to free Kuwait and in the same time support the Israeli government continue the occupations?
Right.
So anyway, if you go to the Arab world, and I saw even on the American media, in the TV, in the 60 Minutes program, that the reporters go from one person to another, I'm talking about people in the street, and they all tell them how much they're angry with the double standard that U.S. supply in the Middle East. So if the U.S. government will resolve this conflict in a concept that the Palestinians will have state of their own, alongside Israel, and be a viable Palestinian state next to Israel, and bring stability, I think the great number of Arabs in the Arab world will change attitude to the United States. They will be completely in a different. In other words, it's an interest, even of the U.S. To resolve this conflict in these directions, and the whole attitude in the Muslim and Arab world will change dramatically. I don't say there will not be any problems, but this is one of the major issues which they make judgment of the United States.
Definitely.
More than anything else.
Definitely, and I think we're coming to the very end of the show. This has been Global Issues and Answers, and my guest is Yossi Khen, and it went very fast, didn't it, Yossi?
Yeah.
Hopefully we'll do more shows on this topic. But I want to urge everybody out there to engage in the dangerous act of communication with their friends and family about these subjects, because we need to get the facts known. You have to study what the situation really is in the Middle East, and then pressure your elected officials to get this conflict resolved, because the United States is the key factor here, isn't it? We are the only country that has the ability.
Is the key, not just a key.
Right.
The key.
But now we come to a period that I call the battle for identity.
Lies my grandma told me. Yeah, superstitious devices. Lies my grandma told me. What? Urban mythological rules. Bubble mice, yeah. My grandma told me. Yeah, superstitious devices. Lies my grandma told me. What? Urban mythological rules. Bubble mice, yeah. My grandma told me.